What is going on, gunfighters? Welcome to Gunfighter Life, the podcast where we talk about gunfighting the right way, with God at the center, Judeo-Christian values, and real-world, first-hand experience. Trying something a little bit different. I'll put in the full bio at the end. I will say that I am a servant of God and a follower of Jesus Christ. And I am your host, Michael Melito. Today's episode, most practical guns in several different categories. Most practical guns. I just did one, guns as art. Guns as art, the most beautiful. And I was surprised at the passion and feedback I got back from that episode. So much so I plan on doing a volume 2. So if you listen to that episode and you didn't hear one of the guns you think is the most beautiful gun, let me know. You can contact me at goodshepherdtraining.com. I'll try and compile one for volume 2, partially of listener picks. So if you've got a gun you think is really beautiful that I didn't mention, again, goodshepherdtraining.com. But as much as guns can be art and guns are beautiful, guns are also tools. So let's talk about the most practical guns, in my opinion, in a bunch of different categories. I'll do the most practical overall at the end. Practical does not mean cheap. There might be cheaper options in some of these categories, but that doesn't mean that makes it the most practical. There may also be much more expensive ones in each category. We're talking most practical. They make the most sense as working tools. Where to start? This is going to make some of you really happy. Carry guns. The most practical carry gun for somebody getting into concealed carry. The Glock 19. Now, if you listen for any length of time, you'll know that I'm no Glock fanboy. I'm not going to bed at night wrapped in a Glock banner. That's not me. They have a lot of faults. But for a practical carry gun for somebody getting into concealed carry, the Glock 19 really is the most practical option. It's a good middle-of-the-road shootable size. It's big enough to be shootable as a quasi-combat handgun, and it's not so big that a lot of people won't carry it. Now, some will say it's too big, but a lot more people, I think, are willing to carry a Glock 19 size gun than they are a 1911. So I think for that reason, the Glock 19. Also making it very practical, it's super easy to find a holster for a Glock 19. If somebody makes a holster company, they likely make one for the Glock 19. Could, if you wanted to get a really classy, really nice, like exotic leather holster for a Glock 19. You could get a very practical Kydex holster for a Glock 19. Inside waistband, outside waistband. Appendix. Whatever you want to do, you can. And I think that's important for somebody getting into concealed carry because they don't know yet, right, what the best practices are, what is going to work best for them. If you're like most of us that have been carrying for a while, you have like a duffel bag your wife may disdain that's just full of random holsters and gear because you tried it and it didn't, not that it was bad gear, but it just didn't fit in for you and your carry style. The Glock 19 is a good route to go. You try these sights, you decide that, I don't like those, you put on another set, you don't like those, and you find out, the Ameriglows, those are the sights for me. Well, with the Glock 19, you got a ton of different options in sights. A ton of different options in holsters. It's a good shootable size. If you decide you want to change something on it later, there are a plethora of aftermarket options. So I think the Glock 19. Plus, Glocks are kind of like the gold or silver of the gun world. They kind of hold their value really, really well. You probably find one used at a gun store, shoot it a bunch, and then in a year or two with inflation decide you want to sell it and probably get at least as much as you paid for it, especially if you sold it private party. So they hold their value really well. It's a practical option if somebody decides, Glocks just aren't the gun for me. Keep it as a backup, or you could probably sell it again. If you buy it private party used, you could probably sell it private party used and break even, or pretty close to it. They're very practical in that sense as well from an economic standpoint. the next one. The ultra subcompact carry gun. Because not everybody's going to carry a gun as big as a Glock 19. We have to realize that. Whether it's a backup gun, whether it's, deep covert carry, crawling around underneath the truck as I was for a big chunk of the day doing maintenance or whatnot. You're going to do wind sprints or whatever. There's a time when the most diligent among us is probably not carrying a gun as big as a 19 or bigger. I think the most practical, very small subcompact carry gun, the Ruger LCP. It's not the cheapest gun out there, but it's very affordable. It's on the very low end of expense. There's the Gen 1s, the Gen 2s. They have them most notably in .380. They also have them in .22 long rifle. It weighs 12 ounces. It gives you 10 plus 1 rounds of .380. Is that Glock 19 capacity or power? No, it's not. But if you're willing to carry the Glock 19 at that point in time, you should probably be carrying the Glock 19 for a super subcompact, practical carry gun. The Ruger LCP. Again, they're not the cheapest. You could probably find a cheaper foreign, Taurus or something. The Ruger LCPs are not expensive, but they're not junk. They give you a decent amount of firepower. If you've listened for any length of time, I stay away from new stuff if I'm going to trust my life to it the first couple of years that it's out. The first 3 years is my general rule. I don't want to be a beta tester in a gunfight. The Ruger LCP's been around a while. I think even the version 2 with the much better trigger and better sights has been around a while at this point. Now you got to test the gun. Don't just buy it and assume because it has a good reputation it's going to work. Guns are individuals. You could get the most reliable model, let's say a Glock 17, and you could get an unreliable one of those. So you still got to test it, but you have a reasonable expectation that LCP is going to work. They're thin, they're compact, they hold 10 rounds of .380. .380 is not the best defensive cartridge, but it's nothing to sneeze at, especially with the advancements in bullet technology we've had in short-barreled expanding loads. We've had in, let's say, the past 10, 15 years. It's come a long way. I'm going to bounce around. We've been talking about defensive guns. Something I hope you appreciate about this podcast is the experience and array of not just defensive guns, not just ARs, not just precision rifles, not just Western hunting rifles, but, a menagerie of bunch of all that stuff. I've been blessed with a wide array of experience in firearms. We've been talking about more tactical defensive stuff. Let's talk about hunting. Most practical hunting rifle. And I'm going to make that one category. And I'm going to say that's going to be a Savage 110 in .308 if I have to pick one. A Savage 110 in .308. They're not the cheapest gun out there. You could get a cheaper gun. But the Savage 110 is proven. It's been around a long time. So if you can't spring for a brand new one, you can look for a used one. Especially at a gun show or something with a little bit of wear and tear that's a little bit beat up. Because if it's a hunting gun and you hunt like I do, you're going to beat it up anyway. I just got done today spraying rust remover on a shotgun barrel. Right? So you find one with a good bore and a good chamber, and if the outside's a little beat up or worn or whatever, that's okay too, because again, you're going to use it. But a Savage 110 in .308, you could hunt hogs in Texas. You could hunt moose in Maine. You could hunt whitetail in Virginia. You could hunt elk in Idaho. You could hunt pronghorn in Wyoming. You could hunt mule deer in Arizona. With all the marketing hype saying you gotta have the new PRC, ARX, LMNOP acronym, round, caliber, gun. That gun, the Savage 110, .308, will pretty much kill anything. If you didn't kill it with that, it's probably your lack of woodsmanship, spot and stalk ability, reading the wind. Something else is probably not the gun's fault, right? Let's be honest. If you've listened, you'll know that have been a professional big game hunter and guide, hunted all over this beautiful country, taken more beasts than I can remember, including hunting for elk and bison. The biggest hunting rifle I own is .308, at least at the time of this recording. If the .308 won't do it, it's likely not the cartridge's fault. The caliber is probably sufficient, assuming you choose the correct bullet construction. Bullet construction is usually a lot more important than whether the 308 or a 30-06 or a 300 Win Mag. You can get a 300 Win Mag with horrible bullet choice, and likely you would have been better off with a 308 with proper bullet construction. Maybe not absolutely everything, but there is very little on this continent that I wouldn't feel comfortable hunting the 308 in the appropriate weight Nosler partition or Swift A-frame or something like that. A 308 I picked, I would admit that 30-06 is a little bit more versatile. You'd be just fine going with that. But most practical hunting rifle, Savage 110, 308. If you want it in camo, buy some Krylon, put some stripes on it. This is a practical gun, not a Barbie doll. Get some good solid mounts, good Leupold VX Freedom, 2-7, 3-9. Just a good solid nylon sling on there, and you're good to go. You may decide later you want something else, but that's not what this is about. This is most practical. If I'm picking a most practical. Alright, let's switch back to tactical. AR-15s. There are so many. I'm going to stick with the AR-15 pattern. There are tons of different calibers, but if you're talking most practical, really the 5.56. There's a lot of other calibers that do really cool stuff. We're not talking about that. We're talking most practical. The 5.56 it's so popular, and you can get it from like 40 grain to, 77 grain, 80 grain. If you decided you didn't want a dedicated hunting gun and you lived east of the Mississippi and let's say south of Maine, most of the animals you'll encounter there, you could if you really wanted to, and I don't suggest it, but you could hunt them with a good 77 grain or 60 something grain, 64 grain, 62 grain soft point. Again, proper bullet construction is important. But if you're talking about a good all-around caliber for the AR-15, go with the 223. Again, the primary reason for the AR-15 generally is defense. You want a defensive, tactical carbine. Now, there's a ton of different models. There's lots of good ones. If I have to pick one, I'm going to pick one again that's not the cheapest, it's not the most expensive, but one that's been around a while. It's proven, it's good quality, and that is the Smith & Wesson M&P. They make quite a few different variations, but get one that's been around a while. But they're just top notch. I have been in carbine classes where I've seen, other ARs just not pull their weight or have issues. I have never seen a Smith & Wesson M&P have more than what I would call normal issues. AR-15s malfunction. So much so that in an AR-15 class, they'll likely spend a lot of time talking about how to fix malfunctions. Double feeds, triple feeds, bolt overrides, failures to fire. That's just part of that platform. But I think those Smith & Wesson M&Ps are a great choice. They are very practical. Backup iron sights, a good red dot. I really like to recommend American, but I'm not going to lie to you. If you're talking best, most practical choice, it's going to be one of the Holosuns, one with the solar power backup on there. There are better optics, but you got to spend way more money. The Holosuns, I know they're made in China. I don't like that either, but they're a good choice, and I'm not going to lie to you. That with good backup iron sights. If you want a good LPVO, again, I'd recommend Leupold. Put a good sling on it. I would recommend a 2-point sling. If you start doing it a lot and you decide you want a 1-point sling or a 3-point sling, whatever. But a 2-point sling is a good place to start. Smith & Wesson M&P, backup iron sights, Holosun red dot, sling. Magpul mags, good ammo selection. Very practical choice in the AR world. Even if you decide later you want a much fancier, higher end AR, you probably won't regret having that one for training, for putting massive amount of rounds down range, for a truck gun, for taking a buddy out shooting, whatever the case may be, right? Again, there are a lot of other really good ones out there. Palmetto State Armory, Delton. But if I'm picking one, most practical, I'm going to go with the Smith & Wesson M&P. Also, again, resale. People know the name Smith & Wesson. Even people that aren't generally gun people, they'll know Smith & Wesson. Will they know Delton? They may not even know PSA, right? Decide you want to sell it to put money towards that better AR. Again, resale. It's a most practical AR in my opinion. Bouncing back to the hunting. And I'm not a Savage shill. I get no kickbacks. I take no bribes from any of these companies, guys. And if you appreciate that, the honesty, because I've turned down sponsors. I don't want this to become like a lot of hunting shows and other things where it's basically just a commercial to buy that brand of stuff wrapped in the guise of information. I want you to get an honest scoop here. If you appreciate that, I hope you consider supporting the podcast. But anyway, it's Savage again. The Savage Axis. Everyone I've ever had has been crazy reliable. There's also the Ruger American, but they cost more. And I don't think you really get much more. I think for a practical varmint rifle, we're talking coyotes, we're talking prairie dogs. I'm talking Savage Axis. Get it in stainless if you're like me. If you don't care about that, you get the regular blue one. You can get one with a straight 3-9 scope and mounts already. If you just want an out-of-the-box option, really the only choice again is 223 for most practical. Not because it's better than a lot of other varmint rounds. If you press me, I'm going to tell you that 22-250 is a better varmint round if I'm entering like a coyote killing competition. Or even 243 I like a lot. But you're talking practical. 223 ammo, because of economy of scale, is so affordable. It's one reason I got rid of my 22 Magnum. Especially when I was reloading, I looked at the cost of buying 22 Magnum versus reloading 223, and I'm like, what am I doing? I'm shooting a prairie dog. I don't really care if that bullet's going 2,000 feet a second or 3,000 feet a second. I care about killing a bunch of prairie dogs. If you want a practical choice, Savage Axis 223. Be out there slaying coyotes, rock chucks, woodchucks, marmots, depending on your vernacular and your place in the country. There's probably some small taxonomical difference in their back teeth or something. Don't care, it'll kill all of them. Coyotes, prairie dogs, very practical varmint rifle. Going back to carry, again, I told you I was going to bounce back and forth because not everybody's interested in all these subjects. People may live in like New Jersey where carrying for them is kind of a pipe dream, right? Carry revolver. Most practical carry revolver. Smith & Wesson J-frame. You take your pick of model. There have been so many models. But again, they've been around so long, finding parts is easy, finding holsters is super easy. That makes them very practical. Also, you can find them used. Most people, especially in the super small airweight, featherweight J-frames, even in 38 Special, are probably not running tons and tons of rounds through these guns. So the odds of them being shot out is minuscule. You can likely find one used for a good deal. Make sure the crown's okay, the spacing in the cylinder, the timing. If you don't know how to do that, you can probably watch a YouTube video on it or take somebody that does. But here's the great thing. It's a Smith & Wesson. If you get it and something's wrong with it, you can just send it back to Smith & Wesson. But a Smith & Wesson J-frame. I like the featherweight airweights, but if you want a full-size version, if you're not going to carry it on you, that's fine too. You want it as like a secondary gun in your glove box or in your center console or whatever. But if I'm talking a carry gun, Smith & Wesson J-frame, airweight, featherweight, again, they've been around a long time. I don't care if it's the 6 whatever number designation. Don't care if it's a 2-digit or a 3-digit or a dash something. There are so many different models. And it's up to you. You want a hammer, you want no hammer, you want a bobbed hammer. Again, it's up to you. There's so many different variations. But if you want a good carry revolver, that's going to be the most practical. Not the cheapest, but you can find some basic models that aren't crazy expensive. You could get, let's say, a cheaper Taurus, which is basically a copy. Or are you going to trust your life to it? In order for me to do that, I would have to run so much ammo through that revolver, I probably would have spent that much on just getting a Smith & Wesson. Taurus and Rossi and stuff revolvers can work quite well. They sometimes can be almost as good as a Smith & Wesson. But sometimes they're not. Their quality control, I think, has always been their kind of Achilles heel. I would not feel nearly as confident buying a used one of those as I would buying a used Smith & Wesson. In that case, it pulls ahead for most practical carry revolver. Most practical 22. I don't think this is going to be a surprise to really anybody. Ruger 1022. Just get the basic carbine, or if you're like me, get it in stainless. Just the basic version. If you're talking most practical, it comes with good iron sights. You can run it like that for a while, especially if you're new or semi-new to shooting. You just want to learn to be a good shooter with iron sights. They're not the best iron sights, but they're decent. And we're talking value. If you want really good iron sights, you can get them. Tech Sight, Williams Peep sights. Really good sight options for the Ruger 1022. You want a scope. You can pretty much put a lot of scopes on a lot of different rifles, but scope mounts. There are a ton of options for scope mounts on an AR-15. You might get a cheaper 22, even a cheaper semi-auto 22, but what about when you want to go mount a scope on it? What about when you decide you want a different stock for it? You see where I'm going. It starts to make up the difference even if it costs a little bit more up front. Not talking cheap, we're talking practical. You can make that thing look like a tactical war machine. You can make it look like an old school hunting rifle. And they're just practical. They run. Are they the most accurate 22? No. Are they the finest 22? No. But they're probably the most practical 22. That might have been the easiest of all these choices to pick. The most practical 22, the Ruger 1022. And now, mostly gentlemen, maybe there's a lady or two out there listening. The most practical gun, period. The most practical gun. And I don't even own one. The most practical gun, period. Maverick 88 12 gauge. You could probably find a cheaper Turkish knockoff, but the Maverick 88s are just rock solid. They have a reputation. And they don't have a reputation for being cheap, and they are very affordable. They have a reputation for just flat out working. And you get all the versatility. I don't like to talk prices with inflation, but they are very affordable. And you can hunt anything from a mourning dove to a grizzly bear. It's a great home defense weapon. It's a great truck gun. It's a great hunting gun. You'll know if you listen, I'm big into survival. Even with my background, Marine Corps, Army, LAPD, private contractor, I can count in single digits the number of actual legit armed conflicts I've been in. I cannot recall the amount of times I've had to eat. If it comes to putting food on the table, the 12 gauge shotgun is the most versatile for that. 20 gauge is also a good gauge. If you wanted to get one in that gauge, I wouldn't knock you, but you're talking about most practical. 12 gauge is just the most common. I said most things with a 3-way rifle. There is nothing in North America that I would have an issue using a Maverick 88 on. 12 gauge. Again, with proper projectile selection, with a good Bernecki slug or a deep penetrator slug. That's what a lot of guides use in Alaska to stop grizzly bears. It is awesome. It'll work on grizzly bears. It'll work on engine blocks on vehicles. Again, I can hunt doves with it. I can hunt quail with it. It's really kind of the Swiss Army knife, or even better. Like having a sledgehammer that can also be tweezers to pull out a splinter. It can be a figurative sledgehammer on game or for defense. Or it can be fine enough to shoot a very small bird and still have enough left to eat it. Because you could shoot it with your Savage 308, but if you're trying to eat it, that's a different story, right? Anyway, for most practical gun, it'd be hard to argue against anything other. Originally, I thought about just a good single-shot break-open shotgun. They're much cheaper, maybe half the price, but they don't give you that reasonable rate of fire. They're fine for hunting. They're fine for learning. But if you want a reasonable rate of fire, moving up to the pump gives you a reasonable rate of fire. And it costs a little bit more money, substantially more money actually, but you get a lot more. And if we're talking value, and of all the pumps that I know with just a good reputation and reliability, I know there's a lot of Turkish imports. Some of them might be better than others. But talk about solid reputation. The Maverick 88, rock solid. Since it's basically the economy version of the 500, not all, but a lot of the accessories, because that's a pretty common platform, will work on the Maverick 88. You're talking most practical gun. If you said the peanut butter and chocolate has hit the fan, you can take any of your handguns. I'm blessed to have a lot of really good handguns. I've got handguns that I've won more to shoot in competitions with than I can remember. I have STIs. If you don't know, those are really expensive double stack high-end 1911. I have Colt M45A1. I'm very blessed to have that gun. My daily carry gun, I'm very blessed, is a Sig Sauer Legion with a Trijicon RMR mounted on it. The single action only version, exquisite handgun. If you said peanut butter and chocolate has hit the fan, you only get one gun, you could take any of those handguns, or you can have this Maverick 88. Not counting my shotguns, I'm just saying this is the theoretical choice. to prove a point, I would take that Maverick 88. Just like when I was a cop and I was doing more specialized assignments, I had access to fully auto Car 15s and literal Tommy guns, Thompson submachine guns, and all manner of really cool whiz-bang guns. Literal full autos. When it came time to clear houses, you know what I took? I took a 12 gauge pump action. In that case, it was an 870. Because I didn't care what looked good on Instagram. Instagram didn't exist back then. And even if it did, I cared about what was going to keep me breathing. And what's going to keep me breathing more than the coolest handgun is most likely going to be that 12 gauge shotgun. Again, because I got to eat, and it's a great defensive tool. It's a great vehicle gun. It's so versatile with ammo selection. Birdshot, number 4 buck, double up buck, Bernanke slugs, Foster slugs. You got less lethal rounds if you want less lethal options. It's such a good, practical firearm. Anyway, I think that's a good place to end it. I will do the tactical verse of the day so that you don't miss it. And then if you want to skip out on the bio and the tactical tip, I appreciate your time. Now unto him that is able to keep you from falling and present you faultless before the presence of his glory with exceeding joy. To the only wise God, our Savior, be glory and majesty. I don't know about you, man, but I certainly need a Savior. With that, I'm going to put in the bio, and we'll get into the tactical tip. So, who am I? Who is this person talking to you from across the internet? Why should you listen? First and foremost, I am a Christian, a servant of God, and a follower of Jesus Christ. God has blessed me to do many things in my life, for I could do nothing apart from Him. U.S. Marine Corps combat veteran, did a couple of tours in Iraq. As an assaultman after my combat tours, I was an urban warfare instructor for the Marine Corps under Mojave Viper. Also served in the U.S. Army, both full-time and part-time National Guard. Also did several years in law enforcement, LAPD. I worked regular assignments and more specialized assignments. Been a private contractor for a 3-letter government agency. That's all I'll say about that. Been blessed to be a state rifle and pistol champion and West Coast regional rifle champion. Won more shooting competitions with the talent that God's given me than I can actually remember. Was blessed to be the commander of a tactical team in a large metropolitan area. Our primary job, the reason we primarily existed, was to stop active shooters. I got the opportunity to head up and be the commander of that team. I grew up around guns, hunting and shooting and competing at a very early age. Been blessed to hunt all over this beautiful country, from whitetail on the East Coast to mule deer on the West Coast, and bear and elk and all manner of things. I've even been a professional big game hunter and guide. But again, most importantly, I'm a Christian. And I am your host, Michael Melito. Of the day, because I don't advise eating bullets. Talked a little bit about survival. Survival rations. A lot of people know about the beans and the rice. Just did an episode on alpha male. It should have come out by the time you listen to this, on storing protein. But if you want to store a massive amount of calories in a small area, let's say a vehicle or something, the tactical tip is lifeboat rations. Coast Guard rations. There's a couple of different names, a couple of different companies that make them. You can get them 1 or 2 at a time or by the case. They are designed to be a massive amount of calories in a small package. A lot of them are fortified with vitamins and whatnot, so you don't get scurvy. But if you want a massive amount of calories, if you live, as my wife and I do, as neo-nomads, you may want a high, dense calorie option that stores well in extreme environments, extreme hot, extreme cold. You may want to make it a big part of your food storage. You just may want 1 or 2 for your wife's trunk, your daughter's trunk, your bug out bag, whatever. They're a good option. Do I eat them day to day? No, that's not what they're designed for. They're emergency starvation rations. Anyway, that's a tactical tip of the day. I am humbled that you gave me your time today. I really appreciate you, and a special thanks to everyone that supports on Patreon. I am truly humbled and blessed. Thanks. And have a blessed day.